Thank you.
Okay, so welcome to our latest top paper as part of the WIVES countdown of the top 20 readings list. So to celebrate WIVES 20th anniversary, today we are celebrating WIVES' favorite paper on the topic of corporate governance and diversity. I'm Joan Lilian Ogendo, a senior lecturer in strategy and international business at the School of Business and Management Studies, the Technical University of Kenya. I'm also the chapter's liaison officer of the Women in the Academy of International Business.
And I'm Stacey Fitzsimmons. I'm an associate professor of international management at the Gustafson School of Business, University of Victoria in Canada. I'm also WAVE's academic research officer. And the paper we're celebrating today is called Board Diversity and Performance of Companies Listed in Nairobi Stock Exchange. We're joined by two of the three co-authors today. All three are highly accomplished, and so I'm going to highlight just a few of their many achievements here. First of all, the first author on this paper was Dr. Nicholas Letting. He's currently the Kenya Accountants and Secretaries National Examination Board Secretary and CEO, as well as the immediate past Vice Chancellor and CEO of the Management University of Africa. He's both a scholar and an industry practitioner with over 20 years experience. He's a fellow of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, the Institute of Certified Public Secretaries of Kenya, and the Kenya Institute of Management. For his contributions to the development of the country, he was also awarded the Elder of the Order of the Burning Spear in 2020 and the Head State Commendation in 2012. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Letting.
Thank you.
We also have here Dr. Vincent Manchuki. He's the director of the Kisumu campus at the University of Nairobi and an associate professor in the Department of Business Administration. He's taught, published, and consultant in areas of strategy, performance management, corporate governance, and entrepreneurship, including working for SMEs at the Seed Enterprise Management Institute in the University of Nairobi and offered strategic leadership at the Kenya School of Government. So it's a pleasure to have you here, Dr. Machuki.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. A pleasure.
Yeah. So we selected this paper for the Women of Academy of International Business readings list because it concerns gender parity issues of listed firms in the African context. So this is quite unique in comparison with the other studies on the reading list regarding gender and board diversity that focused on Asia, Europe, and American regions. So these authors conducted a study that examined the relationship between board diversity and financial performance of firms listed in the Nairobi Stock Exchange. So these listed firms of this study cut across the various sectors of the economy, and their businesses entail both services and tangible products. And these sectors include agricultural, commercial and services, telecommunications and technology, banking, insurance, manufacturing and allied, construction and allied, energy and petroleum, and growth enterprise market segment. So the reason for selecting Kenya as a country is because Kenya is a key growth center which is dignified to become one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. Because you find globally, Kenya stands at 102 and 103 in the ranking of 189 economies on ease of enforcing contracts and trade across borders, respectively, and is ahead of the sub-Saharan Africa. This is according to the World Bank research. Okay, they found that only 7% of all the board members were women among Kenyan listed companies. And they found that only board study specialization diversity was related to dividend yield. And they also didn't find any significant relationship on financial performance among board members, gender diversity, education, qualification, and board specialization. So let me ask you a question. The results show that there is a weak positive association between the board diversity and financial performance. So what was found that is of interest to researchers interested in African business. That's a question to the authors.
Lilian, thank you very much for that question. I believe you are asking about the issue of the findings and some of them turning not to be statistically significant and others statistically significant. But most importantly, let me just ground the motivation for this study. You all know that the issue of corporate governance is very key in organizations. And corporate governance is all about how organizations want to achieve the desired results, but achieve them in the right way. And that is why it is important to inculcate good corporate governance practices. Among the corporate governance practices is to have a corporate governance structures. And among the corporate governance structures is the board. And the composition of this board must be reflective of the diversity. And out of that, the motivation of the study, therefore, was to look at this diversity and how it will influence performance. And as you have rightly said, among the issues that we considered in diversity was gender. And there are a number of other characteristics or aspects that we looked at in diversity. So within that context, therefore, and the surprising findings that came out is that some or most of the aspects of board diversity have no statistically significant influence on financial performance. And this is therefore very important. The question that comes out of it is, should there be any other factor or any other aspects that should be important to consider in board composition than just looking at the different elements of diversity that we looked at here? And the answer is yes, there should be so many other aspects that have to be considered in grounding best corporate governance practices in organizations. And therefore, over time, this has been demonstrated by a number of other studies that have been conducted to look at agency relationships between the board, the management, and other stakeholders in order to ingrain within organizations, top leadership, the best governance practices. However, it should also be considered that the findings may be reflective of some of the unique aspects within the companies listed on the Nairobi Stock Exchange. And therefore, out of that, it is curious that scholars have to continually interrogate these board characteristics, look at the different aspects of diversity, and be able either to validate or to counter the findings of this study. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now, thank you so much, my colleague, my co-author. Am I clear, Lilian?
Yeah, you're clear.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think from about a decade ago, we did a study, and it was a broader study on, as Professor Vincent has said, it was a study on corporate governance, and we started by underlining the meaning and the importance of corporate governance, and it was about the way in which organizations are led, directed, and controlled for the benefit of the shareholders and the stakeholders. Yeah. In our assessment, we are specifically focused on the board. The board is the major component or constituent of the governance of the organization, because these are the people who provide the leadership. They provide the agents of the stakeholders, the shareholders. Yeah. The shareholders have established companies and they want to make a profit. They are there to maximize their investments. And so in the process of establishing the need to know how they perform, we did a study a decade ago, which again, we are in the process of doing another study in a similar area in Kenya. Kenya is a leading economy in Africa, in Eastern and Central Africa. And so the significance of Kenya as a country is that it influences policy direction. Recently, a few months ago, the largest country in Africa, which is the Democratic Republic of Africa, Republic, DRC of Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, joined the East Africa community for the simple reason that East Africa, which is led by Kenya as a lion in the region in terms of economy and performance, has a very strong financial services sector. And therefore, with the Nairobi Securities Exchange, we are able to measure performance in terms of economics, in terms of business, and therefore, so the Nairobi Securities Stock Exchange, which has changed its name to Nairobi Securities Exchange, was established about 60 years ago as a way of attracting revenue or investments from locally and global companies. And the way Lilian has indicated, it has very many sectors, including manufacturing, agriculture, financial services, among others. Now, in our study a decade ago, we established that in terms of, among other things, in terms of board diversity, the leadership of the board, we were disappointed that unlike other developed countries like Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, we established that in Africa, at the time of the study, only 7% of the board members were women. And yet again, women have been known to make a significant contribution in the economies of the farms that they lead. So we had significant recommendations later on, which we shall be discussing. But our findings indicated that yes, there were no direct significant relationship. But what we found out that out of over 50 companies registered on the listed securities exchange, there are about 92%, about 57% of the farms do not even have a lady board member. 57%, which means that they are not drawing the benefits of having a woman, because women are known to have a balanced view of things that happen. So in an organization, there women are, like even in families, they're able to balance the resources. They are very careful in risk taking. And so we noticed that in farms that they didn't have women. And in fact, I did ask a qualitative question. I asked one of the board members, and I asked them, why is it that the women are not here? They are not on the board. And one of them told me that we want to take major risks, and our women may not be willing to take risks. So they were a bit careful. They wanted to take major risks of investments and to diversify to other areas. Of course, I think that was an excuse. But the more important thing about our fundings is that the number was the global benchmark at the time was almost 12.5% of the board members in some of the leading countries. But in the Nordic side, it was almost 50-50, 50% women, 50% men. And so we're wondering why not in Kenya, why not in Africa? Because we would like to derive the benefits of that. And we made a very important fundamental recommendation later on outside of the findings to the government of Kenya regulators to demand that at least a third, we need to make it a third of the members of the board should be women at minimum, but they can be actually 50%, 50%. Of course, we know the contribution of women in leadership. And so for now, I think that's what I would leave it for now, but my co-author, Professor Vincent, can also make his additional contributions. Thank you.
Thank you both. And I really like what you were saying, because one of the reasons, as Lilian was saying, one of the reasons why we chose your paper is because of its emphasis on issues in Kenya and the Nairobi Stock Exchange and how it might be different from some of the research that's taking place in, like you said, in Sweden. And so I really like that. I appreciate that you emphasize that in your answer. I wanted to pivot a little bit and ask a little bit about theory now, because you draw on agency theory and resource dependency theories of corporate governance to explain the relationships between board diversity and corporate performance. Do you see any way that either one of those theories might operate differently on the African continent compared to the ways that you saw it applied in other countries?
Yes, I'll give a go to Professor Vincent to first, and then I'll come in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, this study was anchored on agency theory and resource dependency theory. One of the postulations of resource agency theory is that there is always an agent-principal relationship. And in studies of corporate governance or in organizations, as my co-author has said, when you look at corporate governance, it is how power, authority, and other mechanisms are exercised to direct the affairs of organizations. And in the Nairobi Securities Exchange listed companies, you know, and it is very clear that these companies have got investors, have got different stakeholders. And therefore, for purposes of ensuring that the interests of these various stakeholders who are actually the principals, there is need to have an agent, and this agent is the board. The board must ensure that the different interests, the investors, the customers, the suppliers, the government, and the international investors largely, their interests are taken care of. And therefore, agency theory comes in when the managers of these organizations are not the owners, and they must therefore manage the affairs of these organizations for the interest of the stakeholders. No, when you have the board in place, it should take care of those interests. And that's why this agency theory was appropriate. And when you look at other countries like Australia, you're looking at US and the UK and South Africa, they have established very strong governance mechanisms that ensures the representation in the board and the diversity representing different interests. And therefore, Kenya is a developing economy, and some of the key pillars of agency relationships at the time we undertook this study, and as the results demonstrate, it appears like the postulations of agency theory are yet to fundamentally crystallize in a developing country context. Let me get to the resource dependency theory. In the resource dependency theory, organizations run because they are funded, they are supported by resources that are originating from the environment where they are operating. And therefore, just like open systems, they continually depend on these resources as inputs so that they are able to run their operations. And for these resources to be effectively and efficiently utilized, you must have a mechanism in place, and that is the governance mechanism, where the board is one of those structures. And therefore, these two theories come in handy to postulate the different aspects of the board, and we were concentrating on diversity so that the different characteristics that we considered to demonstrate diversity on the board, gender, educational background, industry experience, and others will actually epitomize the application and or the manifestation of the postulations of this theory, these theories. So in other jurisdictions, we expect that there could be some differences, because even in Kenya, the regulatory agencies like the Capital Markets Authority, the different industry regulatory bodies have got other additional governance requirements. And we therefore expect that if you have agency relationships that are very strong and that adhere to the separation of power in the governance mechanisms, you will discover that there will be a heightened or enhanced performance. The same thing that when these resources, organizations depend on resources that are supplied by the investors, then you discover that that can equally have positive implications on performance. And that is why a mix of the board was a key ingredient for us, so that we see how do the postulations of this theory appropriately anchor the kind of relationships we were testing. And given that the findings turned out to be statistically not significant for many of the variables that we are looking at, it is high time we will then look at whether the postulations of agency theory and the resource dependence theory will actually be the most appropriate ones, or there could be other theories like the stewardship theory, stakeholder theory, and other theories that can anchor such a kind of study. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I may add, if you may allow me to say something in addition to what Professor said, is that as we all know, the issue of resources are the way they are divided. They are for sustainability. They are supposed to sustain the existence in the long term, and therefore stakeholders, especially the resource dependence theory, is that the board who have been given the responsibility through the agency theory to oversee the sustainability and the long-term survival of the organization, it's expected that we expected and anticipated that way, because of the composition of the board, the ability to oversight the institution, or in terms of the leadership, and being able to give direction to the management, because these are the people who have been who have the daily responsibility. It means that all organizations are supposed to be led by a very balanced board in terms of gender, in terms of skills that are available. And because today we are discussing about the gender diversity, we noted from that the relationship were not significant statistically, and that the two theories may need to be tested further with other theories that have been indicated by Professor Vincent. And to my understanding, and to the conclusion of the paper, is that there is need then to link more of the of our findings in other contexts. We looked at the Kenyan perspective in Africa. Perhaps if a wider study was to be done, including other countries in Africa or the rest of the world, we'd be able to know what is the implication in terms of the theories that have been used, the agency theory. And I think I don't want to spend a lot of time on the agency theory, because it's one of the leading theories that have been applied in corporate governance as well as in board matters. And so to my understanding, and for the sake of the viewers and the followers, is to say that more studies need to be done. Perhaps we may need to do competitor studies, so that then we can be able to find out in various aspects, whether within the same organizations or in different organizations, what are the likely effect of the theories on performance and the relationship between performance and the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Litting. So your research on board diversity and performance was conducted about a decade ago.
Yes.
What are some of your favorite developments since then in terms of the nature of the board diversity among firms listed on the Nairobi Stock Exchange, or in terms of research on board diversity among firms based in the African continent?
Thank you so much. I think for me, I have been privileged to be one of the leaders of the Institute of Certified Public Sectors of Kenya. In 2014, 2015, up to 2016, I was the chairman. I was privileged to be the chairman of the Institute of Certified Public Sectors. And one of the recommendations I made to the government of Kenya, together with my council, was to recommend the establishment of what is called mwongozo. In other words, guidelines for governance issues in Kenya. One of the things that we insisted in that blueprint, I could say, is that there is need for a balanced board, and that there should be at least a third of the members of the board being women, or at least more than that. And one of the things I'm very happy to note is that although I may not have the statistics at the moment, there's been a significant improvement in terms of gender diversity in Kenya. And I commit to do a paper with my other colleagues, the co-authors, to see what is the status after a decade later. Because in 2014, there were significant changes in the government of Kenya in terms of incorporation of the recommendations that we made, because I was the chairman of the institution. And partnering with another state organization called State Corporations Advisory Committee of Kenya, the president in 2015 ascended to an executive order requiring all state corporations and public sector organizations to ensure that there is more diversity. There is also term limits of the board members. Before 2010, there were no term limits. You would see board members being in an organization for very many years. And with the coming in of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 and the mwongozo Code of Conduct, it's now clear that board members should only serve for 3 years, renewable once, which is a total of 6 years, which means there's need for more people to take over the leadership in terms of the board and governance of the organization. So some of the developments I'm very proud of, Lilian and Stacey and colleagues, is that there's been a lot of significant developments, and we'll be undertaking a study in the next 2 years and come back. I'm sure we shall get another chance to come and share with you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Letting. I want to add something that ever since this paper was published, one of the things that has happened as a scholar in the area of strategy governance in the University of Nairobi's Faculty of Business and Management Sciences, I still continue to supervise both master and the PhD studies along this line. And among the studies that I've picked, the recommendations of this study to further undertake the study in different other contexts was a study by Dr. Grace Kamau, who looked at the agency conflicts, who tested the stewardship theory together with agency theory in another context. And she looked at the financial services sector. Currently, I am supervising a PhD research on one of these key aspects that we found out in this study. And the title of that particular PhD research right now is Gender Diversity of the Board. That is what I am now supervising at a PhD level. And if you look at another study that was done by Dr. Gishugu, looked at the top management diversity, and the operationalization of this top management has gone all the way up to the board. And it is also including a number of other aspects and the recommendations from this particular study. And a series of other studies at master level and at a PhD level, which I may not list all here, have been motivated by the recommendations and the findings of this study. So, as Dr. Letting has pointed out, there will be a series of other studies, and now that the Kenyan government, having operationalized the recommendations of the State Corporations Advisory Committee that resulted into the development of the corporate governance framework for public sector organizations, and that is the Mwongozo, it is important now to see how the operationalization of this governance framework within the public sector co-aligns with the governance mechanisms in the private sector, because listed companies on the securities exchange are largely private sector organizations. And therefore, it will be important to do that comparative study to be able to see how the application of these theories, the governance mechanisms, the diversity dimensions will juxtapose private and public, as well as different other sectors of the economy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Machuki. And in fact, what your answer there leads directly into our final question, where we wanted to ask you more about the future. And it sounds like you would like to see more comparison studies, more studies in different contexts, but also if you wouldn't mind, both of you, thinking a little bit more broadly, you're speaking to international business researchers here. What kind of board diversity research would you most like to see, especially if people are doing research in the African business contexts? So what would you most like to see in the future?
Thank you. Allow me to go fast before Professor Machuki. I think for me, from where I sit, having both the academic and the industry experience at the moment, I note that there is need for a lot of studies to be done, especially comparative studies between various countries, jurisdictions in Africa and in the world. For example, we could do a study between comparing South African practices in gender diversity, South Africa, maybe the Northern Africa, Egypt, and then the West Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana, and then find out how they are related. In central part of Africa, there is a country called Rwanda, and this has done a lot in terms of trying to balance between the women and the male on the boards and leadership. And so I would like to see a study like that. Secondly, I would like to see a study where, in terms of apart from gender, there are also skills diversity. It was very apparent in our study that we established that a number of you would find people with almost 80% of people with the same skill base. Let's say the accountants, their leaders, they are all on the same board. So it's very difficult to get a diversity there. So again, I'm expecting to see a study like that. But from what I've just said about the African context, I'm expecting studies to look at the continent, the intercontinental comparators. For example, if you look at the African situation versus the European context, as well as the Asian, maybe the American, those kind of analysis, so and maybe longer term, longitudinal studies, which will be able to tell us from the last 10 years, what have been the practices in terms of board diversity on gender mainstreaming issues. I would be glad, for example, between the public sector and the private sector, how are the practices in gender diversity? For example, does it mean that in private sector there are more women on the boards, or it is the other way around? So I would like to see a study like that. So I'm appealing to the international scholars that are in this meeting to be able to undertake more studies on that and find out some of and link them to the performance of the organization in terms of even the not-for-profit organizations, in terms of their mandates, women-led boards, how do they perform? And I would like, for example, as I wind up, for example, how are women led, like for example, the board which is chaired by women, how are they performing compared to those which are chaired by men? Because there could be a different perspective in that. Also, where the board members are more than men on the board, what would be the situation? I think those are some of the things I would like to see in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Letting. With that perspective, I will add on what I expect to see in terms of research into the future. You definitely get to realize that end research that is conducted must have a methodology, and the findings of the study will be as good as the methodological parameters that have been taken into account. One, this study was largely a one spot-on study at a particular point in time, 10 years ago. It will be important to look at the limitations of such a kind of methodology so that we now have in-depth case studies of organizations that we will be determined by some preliminary exploratory research to first and foremost determine what is their board composition and what are the different other governance structures in place, so that you pick a firm like Safaricom in Kenya, you pick an organization from South Africa, you pick an organization from Canada, and you pick another one from Germany or from the US. And when you look at this, then you do a mixed methods approach. You look at comparatively across these organizations, but most importantly, you also go in depth. Remember, the data that we used was that data which we could find available as published. But there will be more insight if interviews are conducted, more especially in organizations that the board is either male dominated or female dominated or has got balance, gender in the composition. The interviews will really unearth several other dynamics that this study may have not unearthed. And therefore, I will expect that in future, scholars who are in this forum will actually take that methodological orientation so that we get more insight. There are many other findings that will come out if that methodological approach is adopted. The other thing is a collaboration between academia and industry. And that is an area that has always been very gray. Many of us, personally, I have trained a lot. I have developed board charters for various organizations, both in the private and public sector. My co-author is a very seasoned governance expert, given his credentials, and you will definitely eventually get to realize this. And that has been my conclusion by the end of the day, that yes, you have corporate governance with all the structures, board composition and everything. But that is quite very far from good corporate governance. It is quite very far from good corporate governance. And I've always said that corporate governance is not always the same as good corporate governance, because good corporate governance is achieving the desired results and achieving them in the right way. Now, you will go deep in and realize that there are ethical issues that are involved. There are quite a lot of other aspects. The question is, do we expect that the composition of the board, when we have female dominated or male dominated or balanced, we have this good corporate governance in place? And that is a question that future scholars in this forum can really interrogate and come up with very fundamental findings along that line. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicholas Letting, Professor Vincent Manchuki, and Professor Evans Aosa in absentia. And congratulations once again for your article that has won. And we're looking forward to seeing more exciting work from all of you. And congratulations also to the women in the Academy of International Business on the 20 years of celebrating and encouraging gender-based research in international business. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.